You're watching Fairfield Public Access TV. I'm Connie Boyer, and I'm here today with Sally Gavry.
Hi.
And Laura McCormack. And we're out here at Waterworks Park. As you recall, we were here last fall teaching you about the prairie, and Sally has called and said now is a great time to come. It's the end of June, and we're going to talk about what's happening out here on the prairie now, the different flowers that are blooming. We're going to talk about the burn that you did earlier in the spring. And Laura is a botanist, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what a botanist does in their life. And Sally's going to talk about how she got interested in the prairie. And one thing I have to talk about first off is that as the novice here who knows nothing about the prairie, I came out here with no socks on. Laura's got boots. So, you know, I am the silly one out here getting ticks up on my legs probably, and bug bites, and not prepared. So anyway, we're going to try to teach people about how not to come dressed like this, and also to help educate Fairfield citizens about what a beautiful place and park we have, and the beautiful flowers that are here, and what was here naturally before we all came to live here. So let's start with you, Sally. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself again and how you got interested in the prairie?
Okay. I became interested in the prairie from two different angles. One was through my sister, who was a horticulture major at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where they have a very large prairie that they've recreated. And she gave me a box of prairie seeds, all labeled, that she had picked from a particular area. I didn't know what to do with them. I consulted with a gardener friend of mine, and we decided to propagate these prairie seeds. So we had grow lights, and in the middle of winter we were figuring out what we needed to do with each one of these different types of prairie plants. So that was one angle that got me interested, and then I got to see them, you know, come out of the seed and what they were like as little teeny baby seedlings, and then transplanting them and putting some in my yard and so on and so forth. But another angle that got me interested in the prairie was I moved here. We had a backyard. I live right next to Waterworks Park, so I kind of consider this my backyard. And I didn't know anything about it, and I was scared to death to come out here because I didn't know what was good or what was not good, or what would get me or what wouldn't get me. So I have to confess, I started out of fear and wanting to get rid of the fear from lack of knowledge. So I started attending a lot of seminars and conferences and just learning everything I could about prairies so that I would be able to enjoy it rather than be afraid of it. When I moved here to Iowa, I learned that 150 years ago, 85% of the state was covered in prairie. So it was what was here. And I just felt it would behoove me to learn more about it, and I didn't want to act out of fear in my life. I wanted to be much more from the angle of enjoying what's here. So those were the two angles that got me interested in prairie.
Great. Well, I think, again, that's part of our goal here today, is to educate people so that they can appreciate more of the flowers that are here, what's happening here naturally, and just so that people can appreciate it more, that it's not just a bunch of weeds, yes, which is what I would have thought.
Yes.
Okay, so Laura, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background, why you became a botanist, what a botanist does.
Okay. Well, I'm actually from New Jersey, and I came to Iowa many years ago because I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, so I came to Iowa State, and then I realized rather quickly that I didn't want to do that, and so I had to determine, well, what do you want to do? And I got connected with botany professors in Ames who just reeled me right in, and so I became a botany major, and it was wonderful. They really were mentors throughout the years, and I actually still work for one of them to this day in Ames. So they sort of like brought me into the world of appreciating nature and the joy of discovery. And so I was always interested most of all the botany classes in the what is it classes, you know, the taxonomy and the what the trees are, what everything is, rather than physiology or something like that. So I continued in that direction, even though I'm not professionally a botanist. I'm sort of a part-time botanist, but one of the things I do have done in recent years is botanical surveys, like for the DNR, or like for the state preserves, or if someone needs a survey to determine if there's any threatened or endangered plants before they build the dam or something. Then we'll go in there and inventory the area so they know what's there, and it's really a nice thing to do. It's really exciting. So there's a natural extension to care about the prairie. It's just all part of it.
So Sally mentioned that you've done inventories around our parks around here. So what do you just tromp through this tall grass and flowers and go, okay, there's something and there's something? I mean, what's the process?
The main thing you do, if a serious, thorough inventory, you start at the very beginning of the growing season in mid-April or late March, whenever, depending on the year, and you go there at least every couple of weeks and walk all through everywhere, like for example in Lamson Woods or Wood Thrush Woods, and pretty much look for what's in flower, what's different since the last time you looked, and often it's following things in flower because that's when they're the easiest to identify. And some things you'll know, but some things you won't know off the bat. You'll have to take a little sample and bring it back and sit with the microscope and the books and to get the species on it, because the characters are subtle and you wouldn't be able to tell in the field. So you just do that to the end, all the way through the asters in September, October, you know. And
oh, interesting. So you've done this park, Waterworks Park? No?
No, we've just
what other parks have you?
Informally,
oh, okay, informally.
We just collect notes on this one. Lamson Wood State Preserve I did, and Wood Thrush Wood State Preserve. They're both the two
okay.
state preserves.
Wood Thrush Woods. Where the heck is that? I've lived here all my life. Where's that? I don't even know.
Oh yeah. Well, it's 8 miles east of Fairfield, and then go south a mile or two on south of Highway 34.
Are there signs people can get there?
You pretty much have to know where you're going. What you need to do is get the guide to the state of Iowa preserves, and it tells you how to get there. But you wouldn't know otherwise,
okay,
unless you knew from a map or
Okay.
But from road signs, you wouldn't know.
Okay, Sally, why don't we quickly show them one of these posters,
All right.
and then we'll get into what we're standing around.
Okay. All right.
Sally brought us some posters that actually there's several posters that you can get these free, and you request them from who? The DNR or who?
No, from the Iowa Department of Transportation in Ames. These were part of the Iowa Living Roadway Trust Fund. They funded this project about in '95, I think, and they still have them. I called them today, and but if you just write to the Iowa DOT, 800 Lincoln Way, Ames, Iowa 50010, then they'll mail them to you.
Great. Now, go ahead, Sally.
These are free posters. There is a set of 5 posters. The reason I wanted to bring them is because I think they're a wonderful teaching tool, and they're free. I can imagine them in every schoolroom in the city. There are different posters. This one, for example, shows the plants, the trees, the birds, the insects, the reptiles, and the prairie plants and grasses that are particular to a particular kind of prairie, which is called an oak savanna prairie. And then there are different posters for a dry prairie, prairies that have more sand, which we don't have an example of that here, but there are those types of prairies on the eastern border of Iowa. There's also a mesic type of prairie, and there's one poster for each of these different types of prairies. So these are free. They're a wonderful learning tool. There's also a poster that shows the sequential blooming of flowers starting in mid-March or April, going through the fall, and tells the name, the color, shows a little picture of each of the things in bloom, so that helps you identify too. So once again, you can get these free from the Iowa Department of Transportation. The address is...
Write to Steve Holland, 800 Lincoln Way, Ames, Iowa, 50010.
And they'll just say you're interested in the poster series on the Jewels of the Prairie, and they'll send you a free set of the posters in the mail. Be sure to give them your address, or they won't know where to send it.
And what kind of prairie are we standing in right now? Do we know?
Well, right.
You probably know.
It's wet where we're standing, so it's getting into things that you'd find in the wetter areas.
Okay.
But it moves, as you move in each little section.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to say, when we were coming out here, Laura got so excited because of this red plant over here.
Which is on this, right on this.
And she was out here last night to kind of take a look at what was blooming so we knew what to talk about. And said she had not seen this out here before. So Laura, tell us about this red, kind of upside down looking flower. And it looks like peppers or something hanging there, the ones that haven't come out.
Yeah. This is a Michigan lily. And I was just telling Sally, a picture of this was right on this poster that she was just showing. And Michigan lilies are a wonderful native plant, a native lily, and they grow in a wetter environment, which like the one we're standing in right now. And this area was burned in the early spring, and so that must have made the habitat a little better, so this plant could find some room to grow, because I've never seen this here before, and I've been through here many, many times. So this is very exciting that we have a Michigan lily to add to our list.
And let's mention right now about pulling up flowers.
Good idea.
How, you haven't ever seen this, so we certainly wouldn't want somebody to come out here. So can you just address that?
Yeah. One of the points we mentioned last fall when we were out here is that one of the incredible attributes of the prairie plants is their root system that goes so deep into the soil. Some of the prairie plants' roots go 8, 10, 15 feet deep into the soil. It's a whole ecosystem that we're talking about here. This one plant does not make a prairie. I think in a mature prairie, aren't there something like 350 species of plants sometimes that make up a mature prairie?
Sure, yeah. Not to mention the soil factors and the invertebrates and all the different parts of the system that...
So it's more than just one plant. If you were to come and try to dig up one plant, you're not taking a prairie home with you. You may be taking one plant, but if those roots are 8 and 10 and 15 feet deep, the chances are of that plant making it aren't so good, because you're obviously not going to dig down 8 and 10 feet to get these plants. So one of the rules of thumb when we're out at any of the parks or any prairie remnant is that we admire the plants, we can study the plants, appreciate the plants, but we always leave them where they are. We don't try to dig them up, and we definitely just leave them where they are. So thank you for bringing up that point. It's really important.
Let's look at a couple other things here. We have a little blue flower right here in front of us. Can you tell us what that is? I guess we can. You can see what we're pointing at, right, Richard? This little blue flower?
You want to tell it, or you want me to tell?
Go ahead.
Okay, this is Spiderwort. It's Tradescantia ohiensis. It's one of the really wonderful little plants that we have. You see it blooming on the roadsides a lot. And one of the names for it is also Job's tears, because if you were to touch the petals in the middle of the day, they tend to turn a little bit gelatinous and actually drip. They don't stand the heat. Usually you see them blooming in the morning. It's actually unusual that we're seeing them this late in the day. But those are a really nice plant.
And don't they just kind of last one day, each of those blooms? They're kind of short-lived.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it closely, you can see there's a whole cluster of them. So the one bloom, I think, only lasts about one day. It opens in the morning, and then at night, its day is done.
Yeah.
How long will this lily last?
Oh, I don't know. Several days.
Several days.
Depending on the temperature.
Yeah. And there are several blooms on just that one plant. It's so interesting.
This one just did us the honor of opening for tonight.
My gosh.
It sure did. So, okay, now we have something in front of us that has little balls on it. Obviously, it looks like it's not ready. It's getting ready to come out. And this one here in front of us looks like it's partially out or maybe being done. Tell us about that plant.
Go on. Yeah, you're the plant expert.
Okay, well, this is the common milkweed, which again you would see along the roadsides and quite commonly around. And but as Sally mentioned earlier, it's the plant that monarch butterfly larvae eat the leaves on this when they're little caterpillars. So you'll see them on milkweed plants. That's their preferred diet. And even though this is common and not one of the Cadillac prairie plants, it's still a nice plant, you know.
I like that expression, the Cadillac prairie plant.
Well, yeah, and but the whole milkweed family is really neat because the shape of the flowers is always the same. It's this very distinct kind of ball of flowers that have the same shape, and we'll see at least one other milkweed here today that is a much more rare type, but you'll see you can still tell it's a milkweed.
And these are very aromatic. They're really sweet smelling. I actually let them grow when they emerge in my garden at home. Even though I haven't planted them, I let them grow just because last fall I actually found a monarch caterpillar on the leaves, and it turned into a chrysalis in my garden. So I leave them specifically for the caterpillars, hoping that they will do their turning act in my yard, and they did. So that was very fulfilling.
Oh, that's great.
That's exciting. And then to show my ignorance again, I said, and we can talk about this plant, and went to touch it, and they said, don't touch it. So you need to be careful with that too, apparently.
Can I just tell you one more thing?
Oh,
about
okay.
This is the one that everyone knows. This is the fluff that the kids like to spread around in the fall.
Oh.
You know, with those gray pods and the fluff.
Yeah.
That's the plant.
That's the plant.
That's what
Yes.
it'll look like later on in the year. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so now let's go to my left here, and this little thing that I'm not going to touch again. Actually, it's not so little. It's kind of tall. So tell us about this plant. This one right here.
You with us?
I'll get out of the sunlight.
Okay. Well, this is wild parsnip, Pastinaca sativa. It is a Eurasian weed, and it may have been brought for parsnip reasons, but in our world, it is a serious weed. And
I don't mean to interrupt you,
But there's a monarch
butterfly over there.
on the common milkweed.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, on the milkweed.
Right on the
very
edge.
end. I don't know if you can see it, Richard.
oh yeah,
It's right at the top.
you got it.
Do you see it?
We should go.
Oh, there he went.
Oh.
Well, anyway, that was a little experience. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So again, tell us about the parsnip.
It's really an enemy of the prairie. When I see those in the prairie, you're ready to roll down your sleeves, get your gloves on, and pull them out and get them out of there before those seeds mature, because each plant makes many seeds, and what's here now, if we don't do anything, next year there'll be way many more until we have a huge problem. And we don't want them in the prairie. It's what we call an invasive alien plant. It didn't develop with all these plants in the natural ecosystem, and it will just take over. It's very aggressive. So if we leave that there, pretty soon we won't have that Michigan lily and the other nicer things that are supposed to be here. But the reason we said not to touch it was this plant has the quality that if you touch it or brush against it, your skin on a sunny day when there's the least bit of sweat, you can get a chemical burn from it, and that'll last a long time. I mean, it'll stay on your skin a long time.
So it looks like a rash, like a dark brown rash.
Yeah.
You can't wash it off.
No, it's burning. It's actually burning your skin, and I've heard stories of guys working on road crews or something and not knowing anything, and they're walking through this and having to go to the hospital because they got so much burn from wild parsnip. So it's something you just want to be aware of, like, oh,
Well,
don't be
hopefully I'm
cavalier
safe.
with that plant.
Hopefully I'm safe. I don't feel anything right now.
No,
So
you weren't sweating.
good.
Yeah.
Good. So let's talk about the burn a little bit.
Okay.
You burned this spring,
Yep.
and maybe if you could tell about the process a little bit.
Okay.
And then I have another question.
Okay.
Once you get into that.
We actually did 7 burns this spring. We did 4 right here in Waterworks Park, and Richard was out taking some pictures, which I know you had on TV. We did a burn on April 13th and the 14th, on the 21st and the 22nd here at Waterworks Park along B Street, between B Street and the lake. We had a total of 33 people helping us do those burns, and it took 85 hours for us to do those burns. The process is, initially, thanks to Kevin Anderson. Kevin Anderson is with the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, and last year he wrote a comprehensive burn plan for all 3 reservoirs. So we had a burn plan thanks to Kevin Anderson. We knew the areas that needed burning. We knew how to make burn mow lines and how to keep it safe and keep the burns to just the areas where we wanted to burn. A second piece of good luck that occurred was a professional firefighter is visiting Fairfield. Jeffrey Learned is visiting Fairfield, and he was able to be the fire chief, the burn boss, for all of the burns that we did, these 7 burns that we did in the spring, 4 of which were here. So he is highly qualified, very well trained. He knows about fire, how it behaves, how to be safe with the fire, and he actually taught a little school, a couple hours, 2 nights before these burns took place to kind of bring us a little bit up to speed, introduce us to fire behavior and fire safety. And then...
was that just volunteer, Sally?
Totally volunteer. It was all volunteer on the part of Jeffrey teaching the class, on the part of him being the burn chief, and all the people that volunteered. It's a huge effort. I mean, it was almost 90 hours just for these 4 burns over, 4 different evenings. So it does require a lot of man and woman power, and a bit of equipment, which we were fortunate to get through the fire department, and the Jefferson County Conservation Board loaned us some essential pieces of equipment. But mostly it's just hands-on, needing people. We started a volunteer group for the parks called the Stewards of the Park. We have about 40 people who volunteered their services to be caretakers of whatever is needed here. So burning was one of the first things that we could do in the spring. And the value of burning is that it knocks out some of these non-native plants, some of these exotic plants that aren't accustomed to being burned. Prairie plants actually respond very well, and some of them actually need burns to get their seeds to germinate. So the prairies were burned on a regular basis by the Native American Indians and also by nature. Lightning often created a prairie burn, a wildfire. So here in the parks, we do what are called controlled burns. They're not wildfires. They're not out of control. They're very specific to areas that we want to burn, and that's why we need so many people, because we have them spread all over and people are attentive to different areas and making sure the fire is going where we want it to go. Is there anything else you can think of to talk in terms of the value of the burns? Another thing is, when we do them so early in the spring, it of course leaves everything black. And in the spring, when the ground is black, then the sun, black absorbs sunlight. And so the dark earth absorbs the sunlight and it heats the ground up faster. So the prairie plants get a good jump start on, oh, it's nice and toasty, I can emerge. And so they will begin growing. I've also gotten feedback from people who walk the reservoirs a lot and bikers who are on the bike trails that they can tell that the areas that we burned are much more lush this year. They've noticed a difference in the areas that were burned. I've actually had people thank us for doing the burns because they've noticed that the areas are more lush, and people have noticed different bird life coming back to these areas because of the protection and the food that it's offering the wildlife. So it has lots of really good value to do the prairie burns. And we'll be doing more in the fall because we kind of just scratched the surface this spring. There's lots more to do here and at Walton Lake and also Reservoir 2. So that's a little bit about the burns.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'd just add about that it's one of the values is to cut the woody things, to get the woody things knocked back a little bit, because shrubs and trees are actually an enemy of the prairie because they'll take over and pretty soon it's not a sunny, open environment anymore and those plants can't live. And so if you want prairie you don't want all those trees and bushes growing up, so burns really help control that. And in nature, lightning strikes and used to start the fires out here, in the Midwest prairies, or also the Indians did controlled burn or intentional burns too. Right? Yeah.
So now I was curious as to, obviously there's some big trees that you didn't want to burn, so how do you prevent and keep the fire away from those trees? Does the fire go up to those trees? Now I understand, I think pine trees that we talked about last year are a little bit immune to the burns, correct? Is that sorta a little bit?
Yes,
something about the bark or?
Well, we did a little preparation before the burns with the trees because we were concerned about, not wanting to torch the trees. Pine trees are very combustible, so they can really flare up and catch on fire. So what we did before the burns was took off some of the lower dead limbs of the pine trees. And also one thing we learned to do in the future is to rake away the pine needles that have dropped to the floor, particularly along B Street. That stretch, Ron Myers was with us, who's local, who's with the Jefferson County Park, and he informed us that stretch along B Street hadn't been burned in 20 years. So that's why there are trees that have emerged on that stretch there. So that's a reason why it's good to do the burns, to keep the trees out. Now, obviously, this hasn't been burned regularly, so trees have emerged, and we were careful to try to keep the trees. We didn't want to lose the trees. Some of them did turn a bit brown, and I consulted with Ray Lane, who's a District 4 forester, afterwards, right after the burns, when we noticed some of the browning of the evergreens, and got his opinion on, was it okay? He was very delighted that we actually did the burns, and his feeling was that we may lose one or two of the larger trees that did get a little bit too much fire, but that for the most part he felt over time that there was no damage done to the trees. I just want to emphasize the fact that this is a prairie remnant, and so our focus is more on the prairie than the trees. Not that we have anything against trees. Trees are wonderful. They serve many purposes. One of my learning experiences in the past few years was reading a charming explanation in a book called Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway on trees. It was beautifully written. I'd love to share it on TV. I don't know if it's appropriate to read something for TV, but it would take a couple minutes. But in just a few minutes, he rather poetically describes everything that a tree does. And I wrote down every single function that he listed for a tree. There were 42 different functions that he listed that trees provide. So on the one sense, while we want to keep the trees out of the prairie, we also realize the value of trees and what really a good thing they are. So just to emphasize the fact that for the prairie, trees aren't a part of the prairie unless it's the oak savanna prairie, which is where there is one tree and then a lot of open space and then another tree. And there are specific trees that like to get burned. They can withstand burning. So a bur oak is a very good example.
Maybe that's the one we talked about last year.
Yes,
I think that was it.
yes. They're accustomed to burn. They have a very thick, sturdy bark, and they aren't bothered by a burn. So an oak savanna we see oak savannas around here. There's bur oaks here in the park. So they're part of a specific kind of prairie called an oak savanna prairie. And it's just that when you get the trees getting close together and close together and closer together, then they start shading everything out. Then that's not prairie. We'll lose the prairie. So does that?
Yep.
Good.
So I think, unless Laura, there's anything here that you want to show us,
We can move to another
We're
area
going to
and
move to
talk some
another
more.
area and show you some more blooming flowers. We're over here in another section now, and Laura's found several plants right in this area, and hopefully we'll be able to show you them because there's lots of green and they're not quite as colorful as that red lily over there. But let's start with what's in front of Sally. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, this is another species of milkweed that we were talking about over there. The little balls of flowers are on this plant, and you may not recognize it as a milkweed at first, but once the flowers open, you'd see that they're really the same shape as the other milkweed.
Oh, look, these down here are starting, they're more open
Right.
than these at the top
Right.
that are more closed.
Exactly, this is where they start blooming, and then these are younger, and it's coming up. But this is Asclepias hurtella, the tall green milkweed, and this is actually quite unusual to find this. This is pretty rare plant, and it's wonderful that we have it here at the reservoir.
I think learning all the Latin names, is that what we're
Yes,
talking about?
yes.
It's like, well, I was going to say, it's like learning a different language. I
Yes.
guess it is because it's Latin, but just to be able to sing all those, I'm impressed.
Oh,
I love it. It's like musical when she says the Latin names.
Yeah.
And if I'm with Laura long enough and I have to ask her, like, what's the Latin name? What's the Latin name? I'm surprised she just doesn't go,
oh no.
but they're beautiful to
Yeah.
learn the Latin names. It's really beautiful.
Okay, so now we have this plant right here.
Okay, oh, and this is,
And we're going to put this bag in behind it so you can really, hopefully,
right.
see it.
And the bulk of the plant is actually way down at the ground level. The basal leaves just are at the ground. And this is Alumroot, Heuchera richardsonii. And this is a very close cousin to the coral bells that people grow in their gardens. And you'd recognize it as such too. And that's part of our prairie flora here. They're mostly done blooming, but this one's sort of a late bloomer.
Yeah, say the name again, please, both the Latin name and the common name.
It's Alumroot or Heuchera richardsonii.
And it's related to the coral bells, which looks so apparent once you said that, because it has that shoot and then all the little flowers at the top like that.
And then you mentioned this thing standing up here.
Okay,
I
and
don't know if we can see that.
This one
too.
isn't in bloom yet, but it's called Rosinweed. And I just love this plant. It develops into yellow flowers, but the leaves, when you feel the leaves, there's a sandpaper quality to the leaves. Is it silica? I mean, is it like a sandpaper thing that's in the leaves?
I don't know.
I'm not sure either.
It's
But
going to have one bloom on the top there.
do they cluster at the top? I can't remember.
Not sure, but if it's more than one, it's not too many.
Yeah.
But it'll be a yellow, sunflowery looking thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's Silphium integrifolium.
Say that again?
Silphium integrifolium.
And Rosinweed is the
Rosinweed.
common name.
Right.
And you mentioned one other plant way over here. Let's see if we can't. Is it that one right there? No? Oh. Okay.
Right. What was the other one?
Oh, I think the New Jersey tea?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's two over here.
Okay, why don't we break for just a sec? We're going to go across our path, and we've got a couple more over there then.
Okay, this is another little plant that is common in these prairie remnants here, and it's called Lobelia spicata, or spiked lobelia. And it has a fairly long stretch of time over which you can find them blooming out here. They've been blooming since early in the spring, but this one is still going. So that's one of the nice little plants.
It's very beautiful. And we might mention that just 5 minutes ago we saw this picturesque little tiny blue butterfly that at first I thought it was a flower.
Yes.
And he just sat on the leaf. He was so sweet, and it was just absolutely beautiful. It was a little tiny one, not very big, about the size of a quarter maybe. And it was kind of a little blessing to have that.
It's one of the things I love about the prairie is that not all the plants are huge and gigantic. We have a very delicate little thing here that it's like the mystery of the prairie. You know, there's always something Laura, you talked about liking as a botanist, discovering things. the prairie, there's so many different sizes and types of plants and grasses that there's always a discovery you can make when you come out. To me, that's one of the real charms of the prairie is kind of the mystery. What's it going to be today? What are we going to discover today? Or what is nature going to present to us today? Just like that, the blue butterfly.
Laura, why don't you tell us, we'll kind of stand up, and you mentioned, if we can stand up. Yeah. Looking out over this section here, there's these little silvery, lighter spikes sticking up, and why don't you tell us about those?
Right. I just thought, as you look out, you see those taller plants. It's a very tall, straight thing sticking up above everything else, and that's round-headed bush clover, which is Lespedeza capitata, and they'll flower quite a bit later on. It's not a spectacular flower, but it's just interesting how right now they're all really strong after the burn and growing. And also, you might notice as you look out over here, there's no wild parsnip in there. You see how this is a really undisturbed patch of native remnant prairie, and what that means is it's never been plowed, it's never been disturbed very much, and probably never grazed, and so the vegetation that was on there has probably been on there for thousands of years, and the word remnant means it's like something left over. It's different than prairies that we plant, where we go in onto a piece of disturbed ground and try to make a prairie. This is the original thing, and so I like to liken it to original artwork. The value is much greater than something that you could just plant. Even though you're using all the right species that you think are in a prairie, you don't know all the elements and all the different life forms that are in there, and so we really need to make sure that we take care of this and don't lose it, because you can lose it not only by grazing or digging it up or ruining it in that way, but you can also lose it by not managing it, by not burning it, letting the woody things take over, letting the weeds take over. So, yeah,
that's a good point.
It's also interesting to note that because these have been here for a long time, they're so adapted to this particular spot. They've been here hundreds of years, so they're really tuned in to this spot, to what they need, and they're really well adapted to this. One of the principles that we talk about in terms of if you're trying to develop a prairie is something called local ecotype, and those are seeds that are plants that are from that particular area. What's the conference we went to up north at the university that has the whole program where they've divided Iowa into 3 different tiers, and there's actually different adaptations of the same plant for southern Iowa, central Iowa, and northern Iowa. And they can find scientifically, and it's quite obvious, they showed us pictures, how one same plant has adapted differently to southern, central, and northern Iowa.
Interesting.
Right. I think it was the Iowa Ecotype Project, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And following along those lines, I just wanted to say that people get confused, because a lot of people get interested in prairie and they say, oh good, I'll plant prairie, but you can go to a convenience store and buy prairie plants or something, and you want to avoid doing that, because they're horticultural cultivars that are like bred to be stronger and more aggressive than the native things, and it can really harm the native things. So it's good if you're wanting to plant prairie plants, which is a good thing, but research sources of where you're going to get your plants and make sure it's Southeast Iowa origin. It's really an important factor.
They have a better chance of living anyways. I mean, if you bring in something from some other place, they're not totally adapted to this area, so you have a much better chance of having your hard work pay off with something that's really beautiful.
Right, and we hope that we don't sound like we're trying to tell you everything in like a few seconds, but there's something called the Iowa Prairie Network, which is a wonderful organization of people who really know a lot about prairie and care about prairie, and and would love to have more members, because you can learn about how to do seed collecting, all the important issues in Prairie, as well as join in on field trips around the state with people who are very, very knowledgeable, and you can learn a real lot. So I highly recommend the Iowa Prairie Network.
Interesting.
You know, yeah.
So can we just turn the camera around on this other side, Laura, and you can take us to these two plants that we wanted to see over here.
Okay, well, here. Should we go to this one first? I don't know if you can get a good view of this, but this is Baptisia lactea. And unfortunately, there are better examples of it down further away, but it's a really big plant, but there's other things growing in so close to it. But it's in the bean family. Does it look like it's in the bean family to you? Doesn't it look like pea flowers?
Yes,
yeah,
the flowers.
Yeah, and I just think this is such an elegant plant. It's just so beautiful. And then you can see how this one also started blooming from the bottom of the stalk.
It's got some of the pods.
Yeah, so down here are the pods that are not quite mature. Later they'll be dark black. And then as you go up, you know, they're littler and littler and littler, and then the flowers, and then the flower buds. It's like you have the whole history right there. And
so are the buds and the pods, they're two different things? Is that a stupid question?
No, not at all. This is a flower bud, okay, and this is an open flower, and if the flower gets pollinated so that the seed can develop, then the ovary of the flower, you know, the flower petals and stuff will fall off, and the ovary that has the little seeds inside will start to grow and become the fruit, and that's what the pod is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So early on, this was tiny, and it had little tiny embryonic seeds in there. And once it was fertilized, and then it grew, you know.
I probably learned that in grade school. I just don't remember. So I apologize to my grade school teachers that I don't remember.
No, not at all. No, because I remember too being amazed, like when I first learned that, at every tomato flower you get a tomato. It's like, oh, right? I mean,
yes.
You know. But this is a beautiful thing, and sometimes it's common for these seeds to be weevils in these pods, which destroy some of the seeds. So anyway.
Okay, now we have one more that we want to show in this area.
Okay, so now we're at a plant called New Jersey tea, and this is a small shrubby little plant, and it's really in full bloom now.
Beautiful.
And this actually was used as a tea substitute by the early pioneers and Revolutionary War time when you couldn't get the British tea. It really was used for tea, and the Indians used it for a lot of medicinal purposes. But that's Ceanothus americanus.
And what was it, the kind of common name again?
New Jersey tea.
New Jersey tea.
New Jersey tea, yeah.
That was the question I was going to ask, was if you could make tea out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Something I read said just don't steep it too long, because there are alkaloids in there which you don't really want too much of. Yeah.
So the leaves, it would be the leaves that you would steep, and that would make a tea.
Right, right. Is this a good time to talk about that book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's really, okay. Yeah. Yeah, we just wanted to share with you one book about the prairie. It's called Wildflowers of the Tallgrass Prairie, the Upper Midwest, and it's by Dean Rosa and Cy Runkle. And this is a very nice book to help introduce you to the prairie, because it has wonderful photographs, and it has a little bit of the descriptive information about the plant, and then also some of the lore about the plant, how it's been used by the Indians or by other people, medicinal uses, just to give you a little bit of a sense of the prairie in a nice way without getting overwhelmed by names and Latin and all of that. It's a really nice book. And
isn't there a series of those books on the different kinds of, like a woodland?
Right. There's one for the woodland. There's one for the wetlands. Yeah. And Dean Rosa, Cy Runkle passed away within the last few years, but Dean Rosa is still a botanist in Ames, and he is one of our premier field botanists of the state of Iowa. He's really a wonderful resource.
So this is again a great book if you want to learn. If you're a beginner and want to learn, and I think the historic value in the sense of like, what the Indians use these plants for. I think that would probably be totally fascinating to learn about that.
Yeah.
Because they probably used a lot of these plants for various things. Like you say, they're medicine and besides, maybe, did they use these for decorative purposes?
Probably, I would think. I mean,
We don't know. I guess we'll have to research that.
One of the stories I heard, the Baptisia plant that we were just looking at, that with the round pods, that when the seeds inside dry up, the Indians use those for rattles for children, because you would shake those the seed pods and the dried seeds inside would rattle. So that's just one of the stories that I've heard of how some of the plants were used.
Okay, great. So we'll stop one more time and go to one more section.
yeah, there's two more really wonderful plants that we have to look at.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we just found a jewel of the prairie up here, and it is this vibrant orange. It is absolutely beautiful. Laura, you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, this is a butterfly milkweed, and it's the third milkweed we've seen out here today. And if you look at the flowers, you can see that, again, they're that same milkweed shape.
Mm-hmm.
And but this one is bright orange, and it's just such a beautiful plant. Everyone really loves it. And we have one here.
It's really beautiful.
What's the Latin name?
Asclepias tuberosa.
And I see we have a few little white flowers around here and some little yellow flowers.
Okay. The little white ones are one of the Fleabane daisies, and they're annual, sort of a bit weedy, but not a bad weed. They're fine, and they grow. You see them growing around quite a bit right now. They're blooming. The yellow is something that we actually don't want in this prairie remnant. This is bird's foot trefoil, and that's a plant that is intentionally planted in hay fields, but it's wild in the environment, and it's makes a lot of seeds and comes up year after year. And you look around, you can't see it here, but you'll see big, large areas covered with it, and we really don't want it here because we want the prairie plants here, not that. So that's something that we have to fight in this section, the bird's foot trefoil. Yeah.
Well, this orange plant is absolutely just amazing.
It is so vibrant. It's really at its peak, isn't it?
Oh.
It's just incredibly vibrant.
And look at the baptisias right there.
We saw
that were
the
just the
Baptisia, yep, different one.
Oh, I see.
And here's Spiderwort that we saw before with the little blue flower. Now they're all closed up because this one is in the shade. That was the one we talked about, that the flower just lasts for one day.
Mm-hmm.
And
So let's move down a little bit further. We saw
Okay.
2 or 3 little plants
Yes.
that we wanted to talk about when we were coming up here to this orange
Butterfly
milkweed, which is beautiful and amazing. So Sally's going to point out the different flowers while Laura talks about what's in bloom here. Richard right now is on this daisy, and if you want to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, that is definitely in the daisy family. It's black-eyed Susan, which is a nice little plant that, even though you see it along the roadsides and you might think of it as weedy, but it's just fine. It's not bothering anybody. It's not aggressive.
And we have another
Yeah.
yellow plant back there.
Right, now where Sally is now, that is one of the species of St. John's wort, which there are about 12 species in Iowa. Some are woody, some are low green plants like that one. And that one, earlier we were talking about lore of plants, and that one has a lot of lore about it. And people would view it as something to really protect you from evil spirits and sickness, and so they'd hang it in their window, and they said that if you burned it in a fire that was kindled on the eve of St. John's Day, which is just a couple days ago, then it would protect you. Yeah, so St. John's wort, and even now St. John's wort in the news, for depression or whatever, it's highly used medicinally. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
right in front of Sally, we have that little bulb thing. What is that again?
Right, that's a young goldenrod plant that has an insect gall on it.
And so what happened to those that we saw in the fall after we did the burn? I mean, did we burn those up? Or when do the insects come out, or do we know?
Let's see. I'm not real sure about that. I shouldn't say, but I was told once, but I can't remember when they come out.
Well,
if they weren't out, they got burned up, you know. But they.
So we don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
We don't know about the plants. Those are insects. I mean, we don't know about the insects because we know about the plants. What am I saying here? One thing that was interesting that Richard can't see from here was we saw a little wild rose with a beautiful lavender flower, and there was only one up here, and it was low to the ground, but it was certainly very beautiful.
Yeah, kind of the wild roses. You see some blooming along the roadsides actually now in a big bush form, and that's one of the species. And the ones you see on the prairie are the very short, little tiny ones, and that's as big as they'll ever get. But you always can tell the wild roses because they have pink flowers.
And then if we can turn Richard around and see this thing standing there.
All right, now this is an old flowering stalk from last year's teasel. Now teasel is a weed that we don't want here and that we have to very aggressively fight. It's just in a few little sections and we have to get on it. It's a biennial weed, which means the first year, if Sally, right behind you see those rosettes?
Yes, here.
Yeah, they look like big dandelions over there. Those are the first year plants of a teasel plant. And if they're allowed to live, and next year they'll put up a big flowering stalk and have these big strong flowers. And you've seen these maybe in arrangements at cemeteries, and that's how it kind of gets loose in the environment. But it produces so many seeds, and it takes over everything. So we have to really get this out of here.
It's actually on the Iowa noxious weed list for the state of Iowa.
Right.
So Laura, who's going to come out here and take these things out? Are you going to do that?
Yes.
Somebody from the conservation area or DNR, or she does it out of her own good heart?
Laura, you'll often see Laura out here getting rid of bad things, and we decided Laura needed help, so that's why we started the Stewards of the Park, to provide her with an army of volunteers to get rid of things that need to be gotten rid of to save what we really want to save. So Laura was indispensable with the burns because she would run around saying, "Oh, don't burn that tree," or "Don't do this," or "Yes, this needs to get burned." So, and it's the same with the invasives. You know, Laura can identify what are really threatening to the prairie, and this is one of them. So on one of the burns, the end of the burn, we actually ended up, it was starting to rain, but there was a whole colonies, I don't know if that's the right word, but there was a big community of these teasels, and the whole crew, we just started cutting down the teasels and throwing them into a fire and burning the teasel. So that reminds me, one of the next things that we're going to be doing, the burns were fun, you know, they're really dramatic and really wonderful, but there's a lot of just kind of grunt work that needs to be done, getting rid of the wild parsnip, the yellow clover, things like the teasel. We need to do brush cutting in the areas where we did the burning. There's the woody plants that died, that we wanted them to die from the burn, but we need to cut them out. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done that we will be happy to have people volunteer to help us do.
And who should they contact?
They can contact me, Sally Gavry, at 472-6112, and I have an email list for all the people who are in the Stewards of the Park, and then we just send out an announcement, you know, meet at Waterworks Park, bring your loppers and your pruning shears and blah, blah, blah.
And wear your boots.
And wear your boots.
Your tennis shoes and no socks.
And then we arrange a date and a time, and we just go to it.
Okay.
Are we going to have an update like they do on those other shows? Here's Connie with all her tiger bites and all her tick bites.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see me later tonight picking them off. Ew.
Cute.
Okay. Another section, Laura? One more section you want to show us? Yeah. And then we'll try to wrap her up?
Okay.
Okay. So one more section. So now we've navigated the poison ivy, hopefully successfully, to come to this real amazing treasure here. and Richard will pan in on it, and Laura can tell us about this beautiful plant.
This is a lead plant in bloom. Amorpha canescens is the name of it, and it's in full bloom, and it's just so beautiful with its silvery leaves and purple flowers and the orangey stamens where the pollen is being made. And when you see a plant like this, it's an indicator of a good prairie remnant, because if there was grazing at any time in the past, they wouldn't be there, really.
And aren't they very slow growing?
Yeah.
So that this is really large, so it would indicate that it's been here for quite a long time.
Right, and very, very deep rooted. But
And there's a bumblebee taking advantage of its fruit.
Right.
Although Richard can't see it. We can see it over here on the other side. And I don't know if it's coming through on the camera, but as the sunlight hits this flower, those orangey ends, it's like little light bulbs. They're like lit up, and they're fabulous.
I love the leaves on this plant too, because they're so delicate, and the silver gray. There's not very many plants on the prairie that have this silvery look. So, in combination with the purple, it's a knockout.
yeah, and if you just move a little bit this way, Richard, there's another plant called flowering spurge. It's Euphorbia correlata, and that's another nice plant of the prairie. Related to poinsettias, it's in the same group, and yeah. And another thing to look at just right along here is there's shingle oaks, little saplings, yes, coming in quite a lot. And this is an example of, if we don't do something, pretty soon this lead plant will be overwhelmed by shade and won't really do well, and will die eventually if we don't do something for it.
So we'll see you back out here in this area taking care of this, because we want to preserve this fantastic specimen.
Yep.
It's really gorgeous.
Yep.
I never imagined that this purple and that orange one that we saw, that they were out here. I'm totally impressed and surprised and delighted that we've got to see these today.
Oh, yeah.
It's really a treat. So we're going to close with going back on the trail and
Just pointing out the grass, the state of the big prairie grasses at this moment.
okay. So
Yeah.
we'll end with that. Okay, great. We found one more thing that we want to talk about before the last thing. We keep finding one more thing because there's so much to see out here. So anyway, so what's behind us, Laura? Tell us about these grasses.
Okay, these grasses that you see all the little kind of brownish tops on, and as you look over in the distance, you see them all over there, and that is reed canary grass, which is a grass that was actually widely planted for bank stabilization. There are some native ones, but really most of the seed came from Sweden, and it was intentionally planted years ago before really it was realized how invasive it is. And around our reservoir area here, every time you go into a low area, it is totally reed canary grass. And that's what this is. And
So how do you get rid of that if we want to get rid of this? Can we burn it all?
not very easily. That, that's going to be a big job to even push it back, Do you have anything about that? Yeah.
It's just really hard.
Yeah.
Everyone who has it just kind of rolls their eyes of like, ugh.
Because in a wetter area, there's some nice wetland vegetation that you'd want in here. The nice sedges and prairie cordgrass and some different things, and the reed canary will just like whoosh, wipe it all out. So.
And you mentioned some of the trees in this area, behind us a little ways. Tell us about some of those trees there and what the issues are.
Right. Well, the trees that you can see there are black locusts, which are another plant in the bean family. They're not native to Iowa, but they're native to the U.S. And it's a problem out here in the reservoir prairies because they're just very weedy tree, and we don't want trees coming in. And one December we had a big work crew out here, and we guys with chainsaws, and we cut down a bunch of them and even put herbicide on the stumps. But the next year they sprout from the rhizomes, and so there's many little sprouts of black locusts around here. So we really have to fight that more and use a bunch of different techniques and really get after the sprouts. But there's really good prairie under there, so we want to like clean that up and get it back.
So, is there a better time during the year to do that? Winter, spring? I mean, or does it really make any difference?
I think there is, but we'll research it exactly. Someone was telling me about a certain herbicide you could use to paint around the trees and let them die before you cut them, and then it won't sprout so much. So yeah, we'd research it heavily before we
try different maybe try different things to see what works the best.
Yeah. But mainly it's time on task. We have to get people out here working. Yeah, and that's the main thing. Yeah.
Okay, so now it's our last shot, and we're going to go up into the grasses, correct?
Well, up into a good remnant to show the big prairie grasses.
Okay.
Where they're at right now.
Okay, great. So we really are on the last shot
now.
now.
Try to be quiet after that.
And we're standing in the prairie grasses, and as Sally reminds us, we were in a similar area last year when the grasses were this high. So apparently they're going to get this high this year, and Laura's going to tell us a little bit about the different kinds of grasses that are here and a little bit of their cycle.
Right, well, the two major, this is tall grass prairie, so where are the tall grasses? And these are the tall grasses right here, but at this stage of the game, they're not very tall at all. They're warm season grasses, which means they get started during the cool spring. They don't do much. They wake up rather slowly and take their time, and they have their main growing later in July, August, September, and that's when they'll really be sending up their flowering stalks, and then they'll be this high with the flowering stalks of big blue stem and Indian grass, but just right now this is the state they're in. And quite opposite from like your lawn grass, it's a cool season grass, which does its big growing early in the spring when there's lots of rain and it's cool and it's all green, and in the summer when it's hot, it's burned up if you're not watering it heavily, and so it's quite a different life cycle. But when you come back in the fall, you'll see them up here, and those are the wonderful prairie grasses.
Great.
Yeah.
Laura and Sally, I really thank you for coming out here today. I know I learned an incredible amount, everywhere from wearing to socks, if you're going to come and do this, to appreciating some of these beautiful plants that are out here. And I think Fairfield has a really nice treasure out here. And I'm sure that many people who have lived here just didn't realize what's here. And so now they have that education, and so it's really nice. So maybe, I'm not sure if we should come out one more time this year.
Yes.
Yeah? To see, because as the season goes on, there are different plants that bloom all the time.
It's constantly changing, and there's never one moment when you get everything in bloom. It's the cycle of the prairie. It's not like a showy annual garden where all of a sudden, whoa, you've got all flowers. So I'd love to come out again in a few weeks and just see what's blooming then, because it would be something completely different. So it's always a new show with the prairie. Every time you come out, every day, every week, it's always a new show. Something's in bloom, something's going to the seed stage, something's emerging. So there's always this life cycle that's going on that's different for each of the plants and the grasses. And I'd like to thank you very much, and Richard, for tromping through the prairie with us. You're really good sports, and we really enjoyed being with you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Sally, and thank you again, Laura. We appreciate your knowledge and you both coming out here to share what you have with Fairfield. Thank you very much for watching.